What's happening, everyone, and welcome back to Media. If you're new to the channel and enjoy movie reviews, rankings, and all things film, consider subscribing. I cover the latest releases, revisit classics, and discuss everything from hidden gems to blockbuster franchises. So if that sounds like your sort of thing, I'd love to have you along for the journey. Now, let's talk about Masters of the Universe. I have to admit, I wasn't exactly counting down the days until Masters of the Universe arrived in cinemas. He-Man has never been a franchise I've been particularly passionate about, but my older brother was keen to see it, and as a reviewer, I always feel it's important to watch the latest releases and judge them on their own merits. The trailer looked reasonably promising, the visual effects appeared impressive, and on paper, there seemed to be plenty of potential here. But unfortunately for me, Masters of the Universe ends up being one of the most disappointing films I've seen so far this year. And the funny thing is, I realised what my biggest issue with the movie was before I'd even properly sat down to write this review. As I do every single time I get home from the cinema, I sit down and immediately start disturbing my partner while she's trying to work. It's become a bit of a ritual at this point. I'll walk through the door, sit down, and I will start explaining the entire plot of whatever film I have just watched, whilst giving my first impressions. It's actually a really useful process because it helps me organise my thoughts while everything is still fresh in my mind and stops me forgetting any major points I want to discuss later. But while I was explaining the story to Masters of the Universe, I suddenly stopped mid-sentence. I actually had to get the phone out of my pocket and research whether the Thor comic was written before or after Masters of the Universe, because the more I described the film, the more I realised I was basically describing the story of Thor. And I'm not talking about a few similarities, I'm talking about what feels like a carbon copy. Eternia is essentially Asgard. The Sword of Power is basically Mjolnir. Hope I'm pronouncing that right, I have been practicing. Our hero is sent to Earth, he loses access to his legendary weapon, and he has to rediscover who he is, and he has to prove that he is worthy of the power. Eventually, he embraces his destiny. The problem here is that Thor already did this story, and in my opinion, did it significantly better. The difference is that Thor understood that beneath all the fantasy spectacle was a story about arrogance, humility, and redemption. You cared about Thor's journey because there was genuine character growth there. You watched him lose everything, learn from his mistakes, and earn the right to become a hero. Whereas in Masters of the Universe, the emotional core is so buried beneath jokes and one-liners that I never became invested in He-Man's journey. The film wants us to care about his transformation, but it never gives us enough reason to emotionally connect with the character behind the sword. Now, before anyone starts typing in the comments that Masters of the Universe is staying faithful to its source material, and was intended to be a faithful adaptation, I have not read the comics, nor have I seen the animated show, and my only comparison is the Dolph Lundgren 80s movie. So let me get the positives out of the way first, because there are definitely things this movie does well. First of all, the visual effects are genuinely impressive. The CGI throughout the movie looks fantastic. The landscapes of Eternia look beautiful, the various creatures look great, the armor design is excellent, the weapons look incredible. So yeah, the entire film looks great. Particularly, Skeletor. His overall design is absolutely phenomenal. Whether you like the film or not, it's difficult to deny the amount of effort that has gone into creating this world. Visually, the movie is often stunning to look at, and the action is also a lot of fun. It's colourful, it's vibrant and energetic. One sequence in particular stood out to me when Prince Adam first transforms into He-Man. What follows is a hugely entertaining chase sequence as the heroes attempt to escape Skeletor's forces aboard a spaceship. Seeing He-Man spring into action, take down the enemies, and embracing the power we've been waiting to see throughout the film at this point is genuinely exciting. It's exactly the sort of larger-than-life fantasy spectacle I wanted. For all of its faults, I never found myself bored whenever the action kicked in. Now, unfortunately, this is also where the positives end, because the two biggest problems with Masters of the Universe are the screenplay and the acting. So let's start with the screenplay. The script feels incredibly childish. Now look, I absolutely have no issue with comedy in fantasy films. Thor has comedy. Guardians of the Galaxy has comedy. The Princess Bride has comedy. But my problem with Masters of the Universe, in comparison to those, is that those films also have heart. They have emotion, they have stakes, they have danger. I just found that with Masters of the Universe, none of that was included. Other films like that give you a reason to care about the characters, whereas Masters of the Universe feels like it wants to turn every single moment into a joke. And I'd honestly say maybe 10% of those jokes landed for me. The film never seems willing to take itself seriously. There are moments that should carry genuine weight and consequences, only for another joke to arrive seconds later. It's as if the film is terrified that the audience might sit with an emotion for more than 30 seconds. Instead of allowing dramatic scenes to breathe, it constantly rushes to the next punchline, and the result is a film that struggles to create any meaningful emotional impact. Even worse were the constant innuendos. There are so many attempts at cheeky jokes throughout the film, and most of them are just cringe. They don't feel clever, they don't feel natural, and they certainly weren't funny, at least in my opinion. They felt like jokes written by people desperately trying to convince us how funny this movie is. And then we get Skeletor. Visually, he looks incredible. And to be fair to Jared Leto, I actually think he does a pretty good job with the voice. Certainly the reviews I've seen or read so far, Jared Leto is getting a lot of praise, and he should. The problem, once again, is the script. When I was a kid watching the Dolph Lundgren version of Masters of the Universe, Skeletor genuinely scared me. There was something really sinister about him, something threatening and memorable. This version looks great, but he behaves like a complete idiot. He's constantly being undermined by jokes, he's constantly making questionable decisions, and instead of feeling like a genuine threat, he often feels like a bumbling fool. That's not what I want from one of fantasy's most iconic villains. Moving on with the cast, this is where things become even more mixed. I wasn't particularly sold on Nicholas Galitzine as He-Man. Now, this is absolutely not a criticism of him, personally, because I think he is a talented actor. But when I think of He-Man, I think of a larger-than-life character, a heroic figure, a macho warrior, someone who immediately commands attention the moment they walk into the room. For me, Galitzine just looks too young in the face to fully convince as He-Man. I never completely bought him as a legendary warrior. Idris Elba is also fine. He's perfectly watchable throughout the film, but his performance actually reminded me of him in Pacific Rim. He's playing another tough mentor type, and while he's solid enough, I never felt like he was doing anything particularly memorable. Ironically, my favourite performance in the entire movie comes from James Purefoy. Unfortunately, he's barely in the film. He plays He-Man's father. Every time he appears, he brings a level of gravitas and presence that much of the rest of the cast is lacking. And while I understand why his role was limited, I do wish he had a larger role. As for Alison Brie, I found her performance one of the more difficult aspects of the film to connect with. This is disappointing because I've seen her deliver some genuinely strong performances over the years, which makes me think the issue may be more complicated than simply blaming the actor. Whether it comes down to the screenplay, the direction, or a combination of both, something just felt off. The performance often felt exaggerated in moments that were clearly aiming for a higher impact. And as a result, I never found myself fully invested in her character. And that leads me to perhaps my biggest question about the entire movie. Who exactly is this film for? Because it feels like a children's movie. The constant humour feels aimed at children. The tone often feels aimed at children, yet it's carrying a 12 certificate. And besides the constant innuendos scattered throughout the script, there isn't much here that feels targeted towards older audiences either. The original fans who grew up with He-Man are now adults, yet the humour feels aimed at much younger viewers. At the same time, the mythology and the references feel designed for existing fans who already know this world. It creates an identity crisis where the film never fully commits to either audience. As a result, it ends up feeling stuck in the middle, unsure of exactly who it's trying to entertain. By the time the credits rolled, I couldn't help but think that if you're looking for a fun fantasy adventure with Shakespearean themes, family drama, humour, action, and a compelling hero's journey, then honestly just go watch Thor. It's a superior movie in almost every department. There is also an end credit scene that is very clearly setting up a sequel, and while I'm sure that's what the studio is hoping for, I'm not convinced that's going to happen. Having said that though, a lot of the reviews I am reading are fairly positive. Obviously, movies are subjective. There will undoubtedly be people who enjoy this film far more than I did. And if you're a lifelong fan of Masters of the Universe, you may appreciate the faithfulness of the source material more than I did. But walking out of the cinema, I couldn't help feeling disappointed. The ingredients were all there: a beloved franchise, impressive visual effects, a recognizable cast, and a world packed with potential. but somewhere between trying to appeal to everyone and refusing to take itself seriously, Masters of the Universe loses the very power that made the character iconic in the first place. For me, Masters of the Universe gets a disappointing 1.5 out of 5. But that is just my opinion. Let me know what you thought of the film in the comments below. Did you enjoy it more than I did, or were you equally disappointed? And if you've enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. I've got plenty more movie reviews and rankings on the way. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you at the next one.